All right, you guys, welcome, welcome. I am back and I'm here tonight with Jeffrey. So Jeffrey is here with lived experience with OCD. He's an advocate and yeah, just wanted to come on and after watching several of the lives, being a part of it for so long, kind of on the other end, wanted to come on and help out some of you guys. So my name is Jenna Overbaugh. I am a therapist here at NOCD. Been working with people who have OCD and anxiety and related conditions since 2008, I think. Yeah, long time. So I'm really excited to be here with you guys and hopefully answer some questions. So now is your opportunity, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook, to get some of your questions answered. So feel free to pop on and get a question in there. We'll try to get to as many as we can. We don't necessarily go in order. So even if we didn't get to yours, doesn't mean that we won't. So yeah, let's just get to it. I'll have Jeffrey, if you don't mind, do you want to give these guys some kind of context and background for where you're coming from today?
Sure. Like as Jenna said, I live with OCD. I have for many years. More than 40. And so I finally found NOCD this past summer. And I've had many different therapists, and CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, just doesn't work for OCD. And I was paired with a NOCD specialist, and like I said, it was August, so it's like 4 months now, and the ERP works great. I have been able to control my thoughts far better than I ever have in the 40 years prior. So it does work. It's a lot of work and it's tiring work, but it is well worth it.
Yeah. And I don't think I could have said it any better, right? Like it is work, but it's worth it. And having OCD is work, right? So yeah, let's help these guys out a little bit. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you.
It's
Glad to be here.
it's like part of the recovery process, I think, to like come back and advocate. There's something really special about that. So, alrighty, we'll just start right up at the top with Natural B. Advice for sexual orientation, backdoor spike, mimicking thoughts of true desire. I identified as bisexual but dropped labels. As embracing uncertainty is said to help OCD, but what else can I do to help? So I'll start off here, and then Jeffrey, if you have anything else to add, then I can bounce it back to you. But for those of you who aren't aware, sexual orientation OCD is kind of an emerging subtype of OCD that's becoming more and more common and more talked about, where someone has really difficulty tolerating the uncertainty of their sexual orientation. So I need to be 100% sure of my sexual orientation. Any doubt about that sexual orientation is really intolerable and really uncomfortable for that person. And the backdoor spike kind of references with any of the subtypes. It can happen with any kind of OCD experience across the spectrum. Is when you kind of start to feel better, and then that backdoor spike is like, well, that means you must like it, right? Well, you're not as anxious around women anymore, so that must mean that you like women, right? Or you're not as anxious around little kids anymore, so that must mean you like children, right? So it kind of like is one last desperate attempt at the OCD to try to get you in its hands and get you kind of wrapped up. So I would just, when it comes to the backdoor spike, no matter how real and how like, but what if things get, you really just have to stay super consistent in your exposure work, because this is no different from me telling my son, like, no, you can't have this toy. No. He goes and he asks his dad. No, the answer is no. He cries, he screams, he throws a fit, he has a temper tantrum. It feels really intense. It feels like, man, it would just be so much easier to just give in and give him what he wants. But if I give in at the peak of that temper tantrum, you have to think about what I've done for the long term, right? Like in the short term, I might have, made myself feel better right then and there. And we might have been able to get out of the grocery store at that time, but I've now set myself up for next time that's how intense things have to get before the OCD gets what it wants. So this is really common. It's kind of like what we call an extinction burst. So things tend to get really, 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 really intense, really bad. And the OCD is really just desperate to play any tricks that it possibly can. So stay consistent, especially when it feels really real, like mimicking thoughts of true desire. Just, I don't know. I don't know, and I'm not going to try to figure that out. I'm pivoting back to what is interesting in my life right now, paying attention to this project that I'm working on. I'm not going to try to figure that out. So Jeffrey, what do you think about that?
I agree. I think that using the phrase maybe, maybe not is a good one. Or another thing that I use, and you can do it visually in your mind, or you can do it physically, is the minute that backdoor spike comes up, you just go, oh, that's OCD, and just kind of throw it to the back. And it does help. I mean, if you're at work, it might not look as good, but I mean, if you're home or you're driving in the car, I mean, just, oh, nope, that's OCD, and throw it back. I don't need to figure that out. And that's what I do. So I think that your advice was perfect.
Yeah, I kind of whenever I'm struggling, I think of it like a paper plane. Like it just kind of comes in and it's kind of like wild and has a life of its own kind of, but then I watch it swoop around and I kind of watch it go. I don't have to reach out and latch onto it and try to figure it out, but I know it's so much easier said than done for sure.
Definitely.
Especially when you're in those anxious moments where things seem
Mhm.
so real.
Right.
Another one. I have OCD and PTSD or post traumatic stress disorder. Can you explain if it is possible for someone to be comforted by something that has to do with trauma? Example, police TV shows related to my trauma. I think anything is possible. I think mental health is really complex. I think OCD is really complex. I think PTSD is really complex. So my best advice here, and not just with this, but for everyone, regardless of your subtype, regardless of what your triggers are, regardless of what your compulsions are, ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I watching the TV shows? Am I watching the TV shows because I like that that's what's on right now, and that's kind of my genuine interest, and that feels good to me. I really like that show. That's what I want to do right now. Or is it like I feel like I need to watch these shows to figure something out, or I need to watch these shows because if I don't, I'm going to feel uncomfortable and I don't want to handle that, right? So it's kind of like police TV shows are neither good nor bad. It's kind of why you're using them and how you're using them. So, um, you know, I think, I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, but I think the use of coping skills or like I'm being comforted by something, I think is probably not a wise choice because coping skills aren't portable, right? So you're not always going to have access to police TV shows if you're saying that that's something that causes you comfort. That's why, like, when we're doing exposures, especially here at NOCD, we're pretty straightforward and traditional with how we do exposures. We don't want you guys to be listening to music while you're doing exposures. We don't want you to be coloring or drawing or listening to your favorite episode of TV in the background, right? Like, we don't want you guys to be distracting yourself or to be actively coping because it interrupts the habituation process. It interrupts inhibitory learning, which is the opportunity for your brain to learn something new. So I don't know if I'm answering the question exactly, not having all the context in the world, but I would ask yourself, why am I doing this thing? Why am I watching these police TV shows or XYZ? I would also be careful for everyone out there, be careful with the use of coping skills because it could interrupt the exposure process. So Jeffrey, I don't know if you have anything else off the top of your head.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it well. I was struck by the word comforted. That's not one word that you really want to be using in ERP treatment, at least in my experience, in my opinion, because comfort can lead to it being a huge compulsion. Like, oh, that makes me feel better, but then you're not dealing with the OCD issue. in a healthy way. Sometimes we have to be uncomfortable in order to get comfortable without the reliance of the police TV show or whatever it is. And that's true of anything. If we're looking for comfort, that's almost like looking for reassurance, the way I'm reading this. And reassurance is only going to make the OCD stronger in the end. So I agree. You gotta know why you're doing this. And if you're doing it for comfort, and not because you enjoy the show itself, I would say that that's probably something you'd want to stay away from, because it's only going to make the OCD stronger, especially as you said, Jenna, when you don't have access to this stuff. When you have an episode of OCD and there's none of that stuff to do. I mean, then you're stuck on your own. So
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
agree. I agree with you.
Cool. This next one, I'm kind of curious, like your experience as someone who has lived experience with OCD. Because I definitely have a lot to say more from just like the educational therapy side. But how did you cope with feelings of sadness during, when things were especially really bad when you were active in your treatment?
Well, I think it's important when you're feeling sad or any emotion that is tied to OCD, is you have to deal with it through an exposure, or that's the first thing. But you also have to go on with your day. You can't. One of the things that I learned was, as difficult as it can be, and I'm not saying any of this is easy. I put that on the table right away. So I'm saying it. This is what you have to do. But I'm not saying it's easy. So if it's sadness, maybe find something that brings you joy. Going for a walk in the park, or whatever, or playing with your puppy or your cat, or something that'll lift your spirits naturally. Because if you give into the OCD and you give into those feelings of sadness, it's just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. Whereas when you've learned ERP, you can still feel the sadness, you can still feel the anxiety, but it's back there. It's not prevalent. So you're feeling it, but you're not really giving it anything other than what it is, and it's just a feeling of sadness. And that's what I've done, is just I acknowledge it. It's important to acknowledge it because it's there. Don't push it away, because that is another compulsion. But acknowledge it's there and just move on with your day, and try and do what you can do to lift your spirits, whatever that may be.
Yeah, I think you rocked that. That was amazing. And I would echo all of that. I'll add that basically, you guys, what Jeffrey is talking about is the evidence-based treatment for depression, which is behavioral activation. So yes, exposure and response prevention, when you get down to the specifics, it's repetitively doing exposures, working at them in a slow and gradual fashion. Like, there are some nitty-gritty details that are very unique to ERP. But when you take a step back and you look at ERP as a big picture of approaching your fears, doing uncomfortable things, and increasing tolerance for uncomfortable emotions, the techniques and the tactics of exposure and response prevention can help with a wide range of issues, including but not limited to sadness. So things like, yeah, I really don't want to get up and take that shower today. Probably a good time to take a shower because you don't want to, right? So whether it's OCD or depression or sadness, it's pushing yourself to behaviorally do the things that do align with your values and your higher self or your future self, even though and especially when it doesn't feel like you want to, right? So but really simply, to answer your question, Michelle, are feelings considered OCD, like feelings of sadness? Usually with OCD and anxiety, we're thinking of like anxiety, or like panic, worry, stuff like that. Not to say that you can't experience sadness with OCD, but it's more of like an anxiety related condition versus like a depression type of related condition. But again, can totally help. Sometimes OCD and depression can be comorbid, so they can like exist separately. Like I have depression and sadness, and I have OCD, and they're separate entities. They can also be secondary, right? So like I have really severe and debilitating OCD, and secondary to that, because I have such debilitating OCD, I have depression. So that's always important to talk to with your therapist for sure. Right. Oh, I would love to hear your feedback on this too, Jeffrey. From, I can say it a million times, but helps always to have someone who has lived experience doing those exposures. How do I do the correct exposure? Do I just stay with the thoughts while I'm walking? Or do I have to literally sit with it? I get this all the time. Like, do I have to actually sit with my thoughts? How do I sit with my thoughts?
Yeah, I would say the best way to deal with it, first of all, saying correct exposures, just be careful that that doesn't become a compulsion, because you just have to follow the therapist. And if there's a question, that's fine to ask, but it's not, you don't have to do it exactly correct. What you have to do is sit with it. If you start, reading a book, or you doing whatever, playing music, you're distracting yourself, and you're not really sitting with it. You're not letting it in and dealing with, the exposure, because then you're not doing the response prevention. If you do the exposure, whatever it is, if you have harm OCD, imagine what the worst case scenario is. But if you're listening to music while you're doing it, the brain's not gonna process it. At least I don't think so, for response prevention. So you got to be quiet, and intentional about doing the exposure, and sitting with the discomfort, because you are trying to retrain your brain to say, oh, okay, that is not important. That's my brain telling me it's important. And that's the only way through it. If you distract yourself, I don't think it works as well. I mean, it may work. I'm not sure. I haven't tried it that way. Mine was always intentional time to just read, or to do the exposure by reading out a script or whatever it was I was doing. But you can't have your focus on two different things. And that's my opinion. I'm not a professional, but I would think that would not be a helpful thing to do.
Yeah. So there are two different kinds of exposures. So, we do, we call them like situational exposures, right? Like these are just kind of situations that happen. They randomly happen to you. You weren't necessarily planning on it with your therapist, but it just kind of happened, right? Like this random scenario, unplanned, life happened. I think of this as kind of you being on the defense. So, okay, like you were kind of hit unexpectedly with something. How are you going to respond? Ideally, you will respond with ritual prevention, and resisting your rituals, all that good stuff. There's also these more like planned or structured exposures, ideally that you would work on kind of with a therapist, identify ahead of time, be repetitive about, and go out of your way to do. That's more offensive. Like I'm going to sit down and read this script 5 times. Or I am going to go out of my way and, touch this thing and hold on to it until my anxiety comes down by half. So yeah, in either scenario, the most important thing is that you're not responding in a ritualistic way. You're really truly just allowing yourself to feel uncomfortable. Usually, not always, but OCD presents itself in the form of a question, like what if ... or what about ... Your job is to not answer that question. So whether you allow that question to remain unanswered, and sure, that question, you can come along with me if you want, but I'm going to go put my kid to bed because that's my plan. That's my plan. But nope, I'm not answering that question. I'm walking down the hallway with my kid to bed, and suddenly that question comes in. Oh, there you are again. Still not answering that question. As much as I want to, I'm not answering that question. I kind of think of these intrusive questions like 18 times 4. I could visualize that in my head, but it would take some mental strategy and some mental effort to try to figure that out. I would literally have to take my attention away from this and think about 18 times 4. It's not something that comes automatically. The question might come automatically, the answer does not. And so your job, regardless of what your subtype is, your job is to identify once you have that question coming up, 18 times 4, I'm choosing not to take and withdraw from my mental energy piggy bank and put it into that question because I'm moving on with my day. So you do not have to like Snickers commercial, pause everything. I'm old school. Maybe I'm like aging myself, but in Snickers commercials, they get really angry. Everything stops and freezes and like they eat a Snickers bar and then they go back to life. You don't need to do that with your exposures. It can help, like if you need to focus or read a script or whatever. But sometimes exposures are that you do this anxiety provoking thing and you keep going, right? Like sometimes that is the exposure. So it totally depends. So yeah, good question though. Lana is asking, who is someone must have come in late. Let's see. His name is Jeffrey. Say hi, Jeffrey.
Hi.
Awesome. All right. Someone's worried about the support groups. You will not be worried. You will not be the youngest one out there. Honestly, there are so many people at some of the groups. I don't even take like a mental note of how old people are. It's hard to tell, obviously, from faces over Zoom, but we never ask your age. Never ask your age or anything like that. So definitely if you're a NOCD therapy member, check out our support groups. They are super, super helpful. Someone loved my word strategy. I don't know if that's a word, but I'm using it. Jeffrey, what do you think about this one? What's the difference between ruminating and sitting with something? We hear that term so much, right? Like sit with it, sit with it, sit with it. I could go on forever about it because I think it's so like wildly simple, but incredibly frustrating. So yes.
Yeah.
What do you think is the difference? What would you say is the difference between ruminating and sitting with it?
I would say that sitting with it is just letting it be there, not trying to answer the question, as you said before, not trying to figure it out, not trying to prove it wrong, just sitting with it. And ruminating would be, to me, is like, and if you again pick any form of OCD, like contamination. I'll use contamination. I don't have it. I have experienced it in the past. It doesn't bother me now, but like you have your phone and you think, oh, this could be dirty. And so I wonder, when did I last wash it? Or when did I last clean it up? Or where did I last have that phone? And who, did I do whatever? Did I wash my hands before I touch my phone? That would all be ruminating because you're trying to figure it out. Where if you just got the thought of, oh, this is dirty, or I might be dirty, and you just hold on to it and you don't do anything. You don't try to figure it out. That's sitting with it. Trying to figure it out is ruminating. Sitting with it just means that you're going to be.
You must have had a great therapist.
She told me she's.
You didn't have me, but you must have had a really good therapist.
But that to me is what's the difference. And everybody ruminates, so it's very, very easy to do. And when I catch myself now, and I just say, "What am I doing? What am I doing? I'm ruminating. I got to stop." Because when you ruminate, then you just keep going down the rabbit hole. And as time goes on and you get used to it and you get familiar with it and more and practice more and more, it almost becomes an automatic thing to you.
Yep.
It would be like, oh, I'm ruminating. I can't be doing that. And because we can't stop thoughts. They're going to come whatever we do, and it's going to be whenever it wants, and it'll be without warning. So we have to be on the attack and not be on the defensive and just know, oh no, I can't go there. Some other people may be able to go there, but my OCD, I can't go there.
Yep. Awesome. And related, so I could go on this forever. But I would encourage you all to consider, what is the difference between a worry versus worrying, right? So, and I'm coming from the camp of professionals. I don't think there's that much difference functionally between a worry and a rumination. Like, it's literally, I think, the exact same thing, right? So I also think worrying and ruminating can be used interchangeably. They're functionally the same to me. So yeah, I would challenge you all to consider, what is the difference between worry and worrying. Worrying is a process. Worrying is where you've latched onto it. And Michael Greenberg is really, I'm sure a lot of you probably are familiar with his work. Some of you, probably don't like his work. He can be a little bit abrasive, I've heard from people, but I think his work is incredible. I would encourage you all, eat the fruit, spit out the seeds. If you don't like certain things that you hear, stay for what does work for you. So he has a really good analogy of, we kind of have two modes for like a security camera. So there's one mode of a security camera where it just very superficially takes in everything, but it never really stops. It just keeps going. It takes everything in, but it's not really honing in on one area, and it kind of just zones, right? Like, it just zooms, back and forth, pretty calmly, no issues, but it never zooms in. So it just takes everything in, big picture, kind of superficially. When you start to ruminate, which is a process, you've been going like this, and then, gotta stop, which is your first, that you have stopped doing whatever it was that you were doing. You have stopped putting your kid to bed. You have stopped paying attention to this movie because you have settled on a thought that you feel is a signal. It's actually just noise, but it's a signal. You're telling yourself it's a signal, and you choose to zoom in. So while you're zooming in and you're trying to see the details, and you're trying to figure this thing out, there's all this other life that you could be getting back to, right? So that analogy is always super helpful for me. It's always about resisting the urge to stop the security camera, resisting the urge to zoom in, especially when you feel like there's something important there. You're going to feel like there's something important there. It's not going to be as simple as like, oh, well, I know that that's OCD, so it's fine. Or I know that it doesn't feel important right now, so it's fine. Like, it's going to feel really important, but you need to resist anyway. Maybe. I don't know, and I'm not going to try to figure it out. So Jeffrey, I don't know if you can maybe get a little bit vulnerable here and tell us if you can resonate with this, just like with how severe things got at some points. But obviously anxiety can get pretty severe, where people feel like they have these really intense physiological reactions. Sometimes, like Tia even saying, sometimes I feel like I'm having a heart attack. What are your thoughts, or what did you learn in therapy to be helpful with this kind of really intense anxiety?
I have had anxiety that intense, but through therapy, I would just remind you, when you're going through that and you think, oh, I'm having a heart attack, remind yourself that you've experienced this before. You've had the intensity of this anxiety before. And so it's not likely a heart attack, right? It's likely the anxiety that's making it feel that way. And that's what I remind myself, that anxiety is temporary. It always has to go down, because your body can't maintain that level of fight or flight forever. So although unpleasant, that's the only thing that I can think of that I've learned how to do, is just say, oh, this is just temporary. I'm not going to like it. And that's okay that I don't like it. And try to move on. Or I don't know if it's really the anxiety is really severe. Normally, we're told not to do breathing because we're trying to learn a different response. But if it's really that bad, probably doing some breathing to kind of get it down to a more manageable level, and then do whatever it is that you were doing before the anxiety gets so high. But that's what I do. I remind myself the anxiety is absolutely temporary every single time because your body can't sustain that level of anxiety for, I don't know how long it is, but I mean, there is an end to it. And the other thing is just reminding yourself, oh, well, I've had this happen to me before. And so, this will go away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that I know that sounds like reassurance, but that is a fact. The fact is you've had this before. My puppy is trying to chime in.
See the puppy.
Yeah, she thinks somebody's outside, but there isn't anybody there.
I almost brought my hamster to the webinar, you guys.
So, but yeah, that's a fact. I mean, you can't. It won't sustain it that high. It really can't.
Yeah, and I'm on point tonight with all the analogies, but I have one more for you. The one that's been most helpful for me in understanding panic, both as a therapist, but also someone who has anxiety. I think this was Dr. Reed Wilson who came up with this analogy, so I won't take credit for it. But having a panic attack like that, like where you feel like you're having a heart attack or, whatever your really intense symptoms are for you in that moment, it's kind of like a car going 100 miles an hour that has lost its brakes. So it's still speeding and it feels like there's nothing you can do and it's just going and it's just doing its thing. But you lost your brakes. How do you get the car to slow down? What we want to do when we're in the middle of these panic attacks, we want to slam our feet on the brakes, right? We want it to stop. We want it to stop so bad. We do things like these really intense breathing exercises or grounding, or we call the cops, or we try to seek out our safe person, or we try to get to a safe place. We Google and we try to look up like how to stop panic attacks or so on and so forth, all in an effort to slow down the car, which is well-intentioned, but actually the brakes are out. So you're accidentally slamming on the gas pedal. So you're accidentally making yourself more panicky by doing that stuff. You're actually making the car go faster because the brakes are out. So what do you do instead? You need to let the car coast naturally by itself at its own pace. And you just need your only responsibility at that point is to make sure that you're not doing anything to make it worse. So that's pretty much your only influence when it comes to once you've gotten to that point of a panic attack. You can't make it stop. We don't want you to try to make it stop. Because like I said, the brakes are out. And yeah, it's really, truly like, okay, I got to let this thing coast. I got to let it coast. And it's uncomfortable, but it's better than the alternative, which is, falsely trying to hit those brakes and actually making yourself go faster. So yeah, that's something that helps me. I just keep coming up with analogies. I think panic attacks like forest fires, right? Like they didn't just happen. Like they kind of built up. They maybe started as like a little spark or a little brush fire and they got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So when you have these panic attacks, I think it's helpful in hindsight to look back and be like, where was that initial trigger? Where was that initial opportunity for me to resist my compulsions? What do I need to talk with my therapist about? How do I learn from this? Because they're not pleasant. I've had panic attacks before. I've had 3 seizures and there's no medical explanation as to why I've had them. They don't run in my family or anything like that. I'm pretty convinced that I literally worked myself up into a seizure from panicking. Like I get it. I've been there. It feels totally counterintuitive, completely counterintuitive. But the only thing that helps me is that analogy of the car. Like I have to just let it coast. I have to just let time pass. Like you were saying, Jeffrey, you kind of just have to let time pass. Awesome. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, I think this will be good for you, Jeffrey. How to navigate not feeling like yourself and just feeling lost in the recovery journey. I often question who I am constantly, and it can be very depressing. What do you think?
I think I often have read in different support groups and stuff of people saying, once you get to the recovery side of it, you wonder if you even had OCD and maybe this is all real, and then it turns to being depressed because for some reason it's like it's too good to be true that you could actually recover. And my response to that would be. We always just again question who we are. We one of the things I've heard over and over again is we are never going to act against our values. So when I get questioning who I am, I say, you know, for whatever reason, I just say, well, why is that important? I know who I am, and these are my values, and I trust that I'm gonna live that way. And so I think sometimes for at least for me, um, it can feel almost surreal that it's like, oh, I don't worry about this anymore. So what does that mean? It means I don't worry about it anymore. I don't give it any more meaning than that. So if you try to figure it out, I think then you get into that cycle again, and that can be depressing and discouraging because then you think, oh, I'm never going to get out of this. When the reality is that you are on or close to the other side of ERP, and that's the result of hard work. It's not necessarily um, oh, you feel lost because something that's been a part of your life for a long, long time is not there. And so it's kind of like, I would say it's kind of like a grieving process because I think a lot of us have treated our OCD like a friend, and OCD is anything but. So, we are learning to live a whole new way, so that sometimes that can be very worrisome. And I'm not sure that I'm totally answering that, but you know, I think if you stay anchored and you know who you are and you will, your values, that's all, that's what you can do. The depression may be just because you're not sure if you actually have OCD. Maybe, hear that a lot. Well, maybe now that I'm better, I actually didn't have it. So that leads to depression and things like that. And
Mhm.
that's my answer to that.
Yeah. And I think some other people have already answered this, like not knowingly in the chat, but OCD is the doubt disorder, you guys. So I feel very strongly about this. Could go on and on forever about this too, but um, OCD is not about contamination or relationships or um, religion or uh, like literally any subtype here. It's about the intolerance of uncertainty, right? It's the doubt disorder. And that's why OCD has a tendency to play like whack-a-mole on all these different themes, right? Like, well, last year I had relationship OCD and now that doesn't even bother me anymore. Now I have sexual orientation OCD. A year from then it's like I don't even have relationship OCD anymore. I have this. And it's like it's the doubt disorder. Like if you just superficially address the relationship concerns, but you're not addressing the underneath the actual difficulty and the intolerance of uncertainty of life in general, then that's really, really problematic. And you have to not just be willing to accept relationship uncertainty or sexual orientation uncertainty. You have to accept the fact that um, there's uncertainty in literally everything that we do. That so much of what we do is a roll of the dice. That so much of what we do is just everyone just putting their best foot forward and making the best of it, right? Um, so OCD is the doubt disorder. It's going to have you question who you are. It's going to have you question whether therapy is working. It's going to have you question what your values are. The most important thing is that you don't get too caught up in that and that you focus on the behaviors. The behaviors in this treatment is really, really important, like literally getting out of your mind and into your body as much as possible. Like, yep, I don't know. I don't feel like myself today, but what are the things that I need to do today? I need to pay some bills. Okay. What do I need to do in order to, you know, do the things that I need to do and do the things that I want to do today. So I always tell people you'll get your answers from doing, not by thinking. So you'll get your answers about who you are, and feeling more like yourself by doing more, not by thinking about it more. And OCD kind of wants you to feel the opposite, right? Like you can't do things until you think this thing through. And we want you to put that on its head. We want you to know that you can do X, Y, and Z. You can still do the things that you value in your life, regardless of, all the thoughts that are going on in your head. Lots of people asking, about pregnancy, so on and so forth. Yes, pregnancy can definitely influence hormones. Hormones can definitely kind of, make anxiety worse, so on and so forth. How do you deal with grief around the years lost to OCD when you're first diagnosed? I know this is definitely a really common issue for people. When you get diagnosed, there's a lot of different emotions, right? Like you could feel relief, you could feel happiness, you could feel hopeful, you could feel angry, you could feel sad, and you can feel all of those things. So yeah, it's okay to have that experience, and all of those things are valid, right? Like it's sad to see, so many years that are lost to OCD. I know I've worked with people who are like 85 and they've had OCD their whole entire life and they finally find ERP, and it's really great, but it's also really heartbreaking because, it's hard. It's like, well, what could have been? What could have been? My advice is to give yourself that space to feel the feels, right? Like it's not that like, well, be lucky you got a diagnosis and be happy you got a diagnosis, right? Like allow yourself to feel the grief that comes with that with perspective, right? Like allow yourself to feel the feels, but at some point you have to continue to move forward, right? Like we can't stay in that forever. We do want to allow ourselves to feel the feelings with some perspective. Eventually we kind of take that deep breath and we reorient ourselves, we recommit to our journey, and we find a way to make that meaningful moving forward so that there's not more grief to look back on later, right? Like if we're grieving 20 years lost to OCD, let's really try to not make it 25, right? Jeffrey, what do you think?
I agree. It's like you said, some people they're 85. I mean, I'm in my mid 50s, and I like to think early 50s. And so I could look back and say, oh, if I'd have found this 25 years ago, I'd probably have 25 better years. But the truth is that I probably found it at a time when I was able to do it, and so I was ready to do it. And I think that sometimes that's just what happens. So I try not to look back, because not everything in the last 40 years has been terrible. There have been some terrible times with OCD, but overall, I just try to, like you said, put it in perspective. It's not all bad, but yeah, it's like if you there's grief around people who, if they if they have a cancer diagnosis that's on a stage 4, and well, what if I had done something a year ago and I was ignoring it? Well, you can't deal with that, and that's time has gone by, so you can't fix that. But what you can do is just live for today and forward. So I try not to look back. I try to just look to the present and know that I'm going towards the future. Whatever happened in the past, I just, I can't change it. I don't have to like it, but I can't change it. So I try not to dwell on that, because that can kick the OCD back. So
Mhm.
that's what I do, is just, as my therapist said, we don't have time machines. We can't go back. We can't go forward. We only have this moment. So the rest of it is just, just try and just accept it the way it is. Doesn't mean you have to like it, but it is what it is. And
Mhm.
I know that I don't mean that to sound cold. It just that we can't change it. So acceptance of it is just a lot easier than trying to wish it away. And just know that you're getting better now with ERP, and it's like, so now you have the gift of ERP and you just use it going forward.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're bringing to mind a concept called radical acceptance. It's from dialectical behavioral therapy, but again, I don't feel like they're too discrepant from each other. So, radical acceptance, and this is something that all of you guys can, benefit from. Radical acceptance is a skill that basically says it is what it is. And that doesn't mean you have to be happy about things. It doesn't mean that you have to be content or accept, um, complacent with how things are. It doesn't mean that you're not going to work to improve things, but you do accept what happened and what cannot be changed. And you're committed to not doing anything to exacerbate your suffering. So radical acceptance allows your grief to be grief and not suffering. So be with your grief, allow it to be there, feel that it is what it is. It sucks that there were some times that could have been so much better because of OCD. And that's where it needs to end, right? Like it is what it is, and we're not going to do anything to exacerbate our suffering beyond that. Awesome. We're getting to some good stuff here, Jeffrey. Thank you so much. It's so awesome to have you here. All right. There was a really good question on here. Okay. Okay. So from Ashley. Can there be long periods of rumination, almost worse than the original thought, to the point where it clouds your clarity? So, take a rumination out and put any other compulsion in here, whether it's mentally reviewing a conversation, checking a doorknob, checking a light, cleaning your hands, like literally whatever compulsion you want to put in here. The answer is yes. That's the whole cycle here, you guys, right? Like, yeah, you have this initial urge to want to do this compulsion, whether it's washing your hands or ruminating, mentally reviewing a conversation, checking over your test answers at school, whatever it is, right? Like you do it once and you have good intentions, but that reinforces your doubt. That basically tells your brain you can't trust yourself. Jenna must not be able to trust herself because she checked this thing. So, okay, I guess I can't trust myself. So I should probably check again, right? So they've actually done research to support that this is what happens. So they did this with people who check like stoves and doorknobs and stuff like that, more like tangible objects, but there's no reason to say that you wouldn't be able to extrapolate it to other mental rituals as well. But essentially, the more frequently that someone checked the doorknob, the light switch, the sink, the whatever, the less confident they were in their memory, which is really notable because you would think that if someone checked something 100 times, they would be really confident in their memory, right? I checked it 100 times. Common sense would say that I would be more confident in my memory having checked it 100 times, right? Than if I had only checked it once or twice. And the opposite is true. So you're actually less confident in your memory having checked that doorknob, that stove, that lock 100 times. You are less confident in your memory after 100 times than had you left it alone completely. So the idea is, yes, you have this intrusive thought of doubt. I left this undone, or, I'm ruminating about this. What if? You have a little bit of uncertainty there, like 1% or 2% or 50% or whatever it is. As soon as you start to do compulsions, that confidence in your memory goes down. The confidence in your ability to trust yourself, the confidence in your ability, to do whatever, it goes down. And so you have to keep that in mind too. Like before you go back and check that lock again, before you go and wash your hands again, before you go back and review that situation, before you go and try again to ruminate or try to figure that thing out, as you do that, you are making yourself less and less confident in your memory. And this is why, to Ashley's point, yes, of course you can cloud your clarity. Of course you can cloud your clarity. Go on Netflix and watch literally any true crime documentary, or like any like false confession documentary, the mind is very impressionable.
Mm.
You can, if you tell the same thing again and again and again and again and again and again, you can actually get kind of confused about it, right? So, um, yeah, memory is not very reliable. Um, you know, it's really tricky. Like, take it, everyone out there, I think everyone out there needs to take like a Psych 101 course or like cognitive psychology course and just understand the nuances and the intricacies of our brains, that they're not that reliable, that the things that we're doing are making us feel even less reliable and even more doubtful. Like, we're better off, I'm telling you guys, you're better off just sitting with that initial uncertainty. It's never going to feel like 100%, but it's better than making it worse. What do you think, Jeffrey?
Yeah, I agree. And I have learned that through ERP. And I point to the analogy I would use is three people can be at the same scene of a crime, and you're going to interview all three people, and I can assure you there are not going to be two stories that are exactly alike. And that proves, at least to me, that not that somebody is misleading someone, but our memories just don't, our brains don't have that capacity, I guess. I mean, I don't know what it is, but, because I have, you ask three different people, or you play a game. I mean, I've done this on corporate retreats where you have 10 people. It starts out as one statement. By the time it gets to person number 10, person number one, what they heard is absolutely not the same thing. And that's why we can't trust the brain. And that's
That's
why
a great analogy.
when we're having chemical, what my therapist calls chemical showers, which, your anxiety's going, it feels like, oh, you just say, oh, okay, I'm having a chemical shower. You know, you're not going to like it, and there's no way. I mean, it's either that, or as Jenna said, give in to the compulsion and only make it stronger, and that's what it does. It ultimately, if we keep ruminating or washing hands or whatever it is that we're doing, um, it just reinforces to the brain that it's something that the brain has to pay attention to. Where if you just don't react as best you can and just go on with your day, then the brain is finally going to say, oh, that's not important anymore. How it happens, I mean, it sounds, this is a lot easier in words than it would be in practice in the brain, but it just somehow the brain just learns, okay, this isn't an issue anymore. That's why OCD will jump. You were saying earlier, whack-a-mole. And my therapist has always said, and she runs a support group that I'm in, content doesn't matter. It does
I
not
need to know who your therapist is.
matter. Tracy.
You'll have to tell me. You'll have to tell me after this.
Yeah. But content does not matter. It doesn't matter because it'll jump around. So you get one area. So that's why rumination and things like that don't work, because yeah, sure, you might solve that one issue, but then the OCD will jump to another issue, and then you're ruminating again. And so you're just recreating that anxiety over and over and over and over again. So, if, like, I mean, like I said, I had contamination ages ago. I haven't since. I don't know what I did, but now I think of things and I just go, oh yeah, maybe. Maybe. But I got to go on with my day. I mean, and with COVID, the last almost 2 years of our lives here in this country and around the world, people say, "Are you worried about getting COVID?" Well, I'm not really worried about it. Am I concerned? Yeah, I don't want to get it. But I have to live my life. I have to live in the world. Having said that, I do it with the safety precautions that are recommended. But if we make it worse than it is, then we just make things stronger. And it's our inclination to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
And so we have to. It's almost like you have to, not almost, but you have to do exactly the opposite of what your brain is telling you.
Mm-hmm.
because that's what's going to work. As
Yeah,
scary as
and
it sounds.
I think that's what contributes to all of these changes physiologically in the brain, right? So our brains have neuroplasticity, which means they're flexible and they change, and it can learn new things and make neural adaptations. And when you no longer use neural information, your brain prunes it out. Like it literally, I always tell my members, I I don't remember, basic things that we learned in my seventh grade history class because I don't rehearse that information anymore. I don't engage with that information anymore. So my brain realized, not important, prune it out. But if I would have been rehearsing it and engaging with it this whole time, my brain would have known that it was important and therefore it needed to stay there. It needed to keep it around. And so I think that our brains, and we'll kind of wrap up with this, you guys. Our brains are kind of like gardens, and we get to choose like what stays healthy and what doesn't, and kind of what we kind of leave to die and wither away to some extent. There are always going to be some weeds, but we get to decide, do we water those weeds? Do we make them grow? Do we contribute to their growth and their overtaking of the beautiful flowers? There's always going to be some little things that pop up, but we can choose not to make those things worse, right? So we can choose to make our flowers, the good things in our garden, kind of stand out. So it's complicated, and it's all, like Jeffrey and I have said so many times, it's so much easier said than done. But if you stay committed to the process and you really commit to your behaviors, acting as though XYZ, acting as though this thing isn't contaminated, acting as though I am okay with getting sick, acting as though I'm maybe I will hurt my child tonight, whatever, like I'm still going to act as though I never had that thought in the first place. I'm going to continue to act as though, XYZ. I'm going to continue to act as though that this never happened to me in the first place. So Jeffrey, this was so much fun with you.
Yes, thank
I'd
you.
love to have you back one of these nights. It was really great to get your insight. I'm sure you're super helpful for people. So Jeffrey, is there anything else you'd like to say before we close out for the evening?
No, I would just tell people, if you're either if you're in ERP therapy or you're considering ERP therapy, I would highly recommend it. But no, it is a commitment, and the success of it is dependent on on you doing the homework. As much as none of us, I haven't met one person who likes it. So it's not that you have to like it, it's just that you have to go through it, and reach out to other people in the support groups, or on the NOCD app. And because people, we all know what it's like, so we can support one another. But doing it without reassurance, sometimes it makes it feel like somebody's not being very nice to us, when in actuality, that's the nicest thing that is being done, is not feeding that reassurance or that compulsion. So it
Mhm.
is a commitment, but you can do it. People say, "Oh, I don't know if I can do it." You can do it. You can do it. It may take a while, and who cares? If it takes 8 months, fine. If it takes 3 years, fine. You'll get better a little at a time, or you're able to adjust quicker. Just don't judge that. Just do it and be committed to it. That's all you need to do, and the rest will fall into place.
Awesome. It's always so good to have you guys come back after or amidst your recovery and contribute in this way. It's really, really special. So thank you guys again for your awesome questions. These are recorded, so you can always go back or share with someone. They're on our Facebook and on our YouTube. So we'll be back for the rest of the week. We have other guests lined up, but hopefully we'll see Jeffrey again sometime soon, because we really appreciated all of your insight and feedback. So thank you guys so much. And thank you, Jeffrey. It was awesome having
You're
you.
welcome.
Good night,
Good
you
night.
guys. Bye.